And dozens of civilians from Mariupol have arrived at temporary accommodation following the evacuation from bunkers in the Azovstal steel plant, all thanks to the UN, the International Red Cross, leading a deal to ease the ordeal of the most destructive siege of the war in Ukraine. The UN says an operation to evacuate people from the steel works had been underway since Friday. Sunday confirmed the safe passage operation was ongoing at the steel plant in coordination with the ICRC and parties to the conflict. This morning, the Mariupol City Council says 2 additional locations will house refugees coming from the besieged city. Authorities will go to 2 villages on Mangush, which is west of Mariupol, and a village near Berdyansk in the southeast of Ukraine. A member of Ukraine's National Guard says hundreds of people still remain in bunkers in the besieged Azovstal steel works in Mariupol and will require at least 2 more evacuation efforts to get everyone out. Those who've been evacuated have been recounting their experience and how they almost lost hope of ever being taken out of there alive. One woman said she had not seen sunlight for 2 months. Let's speak now to security expert Chidi Nwonu, who joins me from London. Chidi, great to see you. Would you consider the evacuation of civilians from Mariupol progress on the part of international efforts in this war in Ukraine?
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having me. Yes, I would think just purely from a humanitarian point of view, it's a sign that diplomacy is working. The intervention of the UN has clearly helped. So this was a UN ICRC operation. It's positive, as I said, from a humanitarian point of view. From a military point of view, I think for the Ukrainian side, it's less positive because this obviously means that the Russians, even though they've not been holding back so far, can go much harder and much deeper against the Azovstal works. But hopefully, by the end of this process, all the civilians within the steelworks will be evacuated. And unfortunately, as I said, from a military point of view, that will then be a fight to the finish. And it will be seen if the Ukrainians are able to negotiate safe passage for the remaining troops in the steelworks, or if they will have to stand and fight to the death.
And that is another aspect, isn't it? In as much as civilians are able to leave Mariupol, you have to think about the soldiers and what happens to them. This will be an all-out, I mean, just how do you think this will play out? You think that, there could be a face-off between the Ukrainian soldiers and the Russian forces that are present at the Azovstal steel plant?
Yeah, so almost inevitably, there's several factors playing out here. So the key one overall is the operational picture, in that in order for the Russians to hold on to, for the Ukrainians to hold on to the Azovstal plant, they have to keep up pressure on the Russians. So it's not just staying in the plant and waiting for them to attack. They'll be going out, as you can see from videos, that they're still putting out that they're attacking Russians, laying ambushes, and they've still got communications. So we're seeing videos from inside the plant. So all of this is important. They're not only attacking the Russians, they're also passing information onto their own forces. On the Russian side, they need to dedicate combat power to contain the plant, to stop those Ukrainian forces from breaking out. To besiege the plant, they need to dedicate artillery, air power, drones, other forms of surveillance equipment to monitor the plant. All of this is equipment that they would be better used in the eastern part of the country. So for both sides, this is a key battle. It's not just from a military point of view, but also from a prestige point of view. The siege of Mariupol is now one of the longest sieges in post Second World War history. It's gone down in military history, as a fairly, crunchy battle. So for both sides, it has to be a fight to the finish.
Wow, that's a pretty interesting perspective. So the question then follows, what happens to civilians afterwards? As an expert yourself in these matters, what's, likely, I mean, for the civilians, what's their likely reaction being let out after 2 months? One woman just said she hadn't seen sunlight for 2 days. Many losing hope of ever making it out alive from Mariupol.
I think their first reaction will be relief. And as you said, just seeing the sun and getting fresh air will be something that everyone will relish. It's speaking as a human being, it's tragic to see the pictures of children, in those bunkers, knowing, the amount of firepower that is being concentrated on it. It's really terrible. What it actually exposes is a much wider problem that's been going on in the background to all the terrible things that are going on in this war, which is the displacement of Ukrainians into Russia. And there's been a really good piece that was done here in the media about some Ukrainians that were taken from Mariupol and taken to Russia, and they were offered Russian citizenship, Russian passports to stay in Russia. And despite all they went through, not all of them refused. Some of them did stay in Russia. Some of them, went back to Ukraine. And they're being sent to different parts of Russia. Some are being sent to the Far East, which is the Asian part of Russia, next to China and Japan. So it's not just the fact that they're being taken out of Mariupol or taken out of the war zone. They're being taken out of Ukraine and being taken out of their country, which is going to be a second and third order effects that we can't really see what the outcome of that will be. What at the end of the war will Ukraine demand that all these people return, and if they want to return and they're prevented, who's going to compel Russia? And if they don't want to return, what does that make them? Does Ukraine renounce their citizenship? So it's another kind of really confused element of this war that is just happening in the background.
Yeah, and I remember speaking to some Nigerians who were able to evacuate from some of these besieged cities, Kherson, for instance. I think many of them, and even Sumi, a lot of them said they were offered, an opportunity to go to Russia, or Russia offered to evacuate them into Russia, and they said, that they couldn't go because there was a likelihood that if they did, they wouldn't be allowed back into Ukraine. I think there's a law regarding that. But so we know that more humanitarian efforts is still underway. But why do you think Russia is doing this? Why do you think Russia changed its mind and allowed for the evacuations to take place this weekend?
Well, I think to answer the first question, why Russia is doing this in terms of the evacuations into Russia, it's a way to put pressure on Ukraine. It's a way of depopulating the country. It's a way of taking away. It's a propaganda piece. So people who've been taken out of Ukraine take up Russian citizenship. At some point, you're going to see them on the news saying how great life is in Russia. It's a way of getting back at the Ukrainians. And as I said, it also gives Russia a kind of a bit of leverage over Ukraine. However this war ends, there will always be that unresolved issue of the people that were evacuated and how to get them back. But in terms of why this evacuation took place now, I think it was the influence of the United Nations. The Russians couldn't be seen after, firing rockets into Kiev when the UN Secretary General was there. They couldn't also be seen to be, defying his will and, embarrassing the UN and refusing to allow these evacuations. And then from a military point of view, as I said, the removal of civilians from the steel plant means that the Russians can use a number of weapon systems, although I don't think there's anything they haven't used yet. But this opens up the door for them to use, any number of bunker-busting weapons or even more crude tactics, such as pumping in tear gas or pumping in water into the tunnels and things like that.
I want to talk about, the attack on Belgorod that's been reported this morning, the city on the side of the Russian border with Ukraine. It's not the first time there's been an attack, on Russia this close enough to Russian soil, and Ukraine denied it. Now, if not Ukraine, who do you think is carrying out these attacks?
It will be Ukraine that will be carrying out the attacks because whilst there are militaries that have the capabilities, obviously the NATO militaries, the Americans would have the capabilities to do this. It would be virtually impossible for them to do it. No, not virtually impossible. It would be very difficult for them to do it or run that risk. Most likely what's happening is that there is a lot of cooperation. They're giving them intelligence in order to conduct these attacks. So the reason why I say it's very risky is that even if you use American aircraft, they have their own radar signature, which is completely different from the radar signature of Ukrainian aircraft or Russian aircraft. They have the emissions they'll be giving out, the identification friend or foe will be, American or NATO signals. So all of these little clues will be quite easy for the Russians to detect, even the takeoffs from bases and the refueling aircraft. So it's likely to be Ukrainian aircraft conducting this, but with a lot of Western support. And the key thing is, first, there's three key elements. The first is that the ability of the Ukrainians to undertake these kind of attacks, even though it's not that far into Russia, it's still in Russia. You still have to break through Russian defenses. It shows military skill, and it also shows, a kind of a strategic intent, and it also shows incompetence on the side of the Russians that their anti-aircraft and other defenses are being defeated repeatedly. But also, in terms of the strategy, it puts pressure on the Russians in terms of their logistics comes through Belgorod. A lot of their stores are in Belgorod. If Belgorod keeps getting attacked, or even Kursk was attacked the other day, the Russians are going to have to disperse their stores. It puts more strain on their resources. They need more trucks, which sounds really anodyne, but trucks are very important in war, as just to supply things. They need more trucks, they need more fuel, and they need more men. They need more men to guard each of these locations, and they need to be, anti-aircraft and other weapons that could be in Ukraine. Giving them air superiority, have to be pulled back into Russia to defend Russian territory. And then the final thing is a psychological element. So just like in the Second World War, when the United Kingdom was, facing Nazi Germany and was by itself, it started conducting air raids on German cities. Strategically or operationally, they didn't really have that much of an effect, but psychologically, it gave the British that belief that they were fighting back, they were taking the war to the enemy, they weren't, so isolated. And it's the same thing for the Ukrainians. Although the Ukrainians are not claiming these attacks, I think everybody understands that these are Ukrainian attacks, and it's a psychological boost for their fighters.
Wow. So much going on in Ukraine today. I do have more questions, of course, but I guess we'll have to postpone this conversation to some other time. Chidi, thank you again for joining me this morning.
Thank you for your time.